Cette conférence va maintenant être enregistrée.
On post-growth narrative, and I think it's an important subject. I'm a physicist and I work for Inter-Environnement Wallonie, which is the Walloon Federation of Environmental NGOs, and so we are exploring, asking us a lot of questions, a little bit like everyone, I guess. We don't have definitive answers, but I want to take the opportunity today to share a little bit of the contents and the analysis that we have done on these questions. So the first part of my presentation will be more on the facts, on the contents part, to try to have a diagnosis of the situation, and only after I think it's important to separate the two discussion, think and discuss about strategy communication, which is it's not an easy subject to talk about, I think on the public side. So I start with the main takeaways, so that will be maybe easier to follow afterwards. I will try to show you that decoupling the decoupling strategy is most likely to fail to meet climate objectives of the Paris Agreement. GDP growth should not remain a political objective. And while GDP degrowth is not per se an objective, it might be a central feature of real-life mitigation pathways. And then that will be more in the second part, some discussion about wealth repartition. That will be an increasingly central topic. So first, growth thinking is really at the heart of the decision-making process right now. It's a cornerstone of all major modelizations, economic and climate modelization. So we cannot just say as a NGO community that we don't care about that question of growth. We have to ask ourselves, is it possible to live with this growth and make it green? Or is it not possible to meet environmental objective, and do we have to challenge that narrative because it's part of the problem? So to try to answer that, I will try to be quantitative and to dig a little bit into numbers. Hopefully not too much, but it's important not to be only in opinions, because sometimes we can have discussion between people that some of them like sobriety, some of them like simple lifestyle, but it's not only about that. It's also that there are constraints from the science, and how can we use the carbon budget, for example. So just this, I go fast. It's a few examples on how growth is really embed in the climate community. Like Nicolas Stern talks about doubling the size of the economy in the next 20 years. This is for the basic scenarios for IPCC modelization. You see on the left that you have very different pathways for population evolution during the century. That it can grow, it can be stabilized, or it can even degrowth. But for GDP, it's not the case. Every scenario that is on the basis of the modelization is based on growth, and the lowest one, the red curve, implies that the size of the economy is increased fivefold during the century. So it's not a small growth in size. So this is in opposition with what the Club of Rome has been saying for a long time, and I guess you are familiar with this contents. But how is the narrative made to connect these things? It's the decoupling theory that come into play when we say that we heard that we should make GDP growth uncoupled from resource consumption and pollution. That means that we aim at having more purchasing power for everyone, more GDP per capita, and at the same time, we hope that we will have less resource consumption and pollution from the people. So can we? The question about decoupling is, can we really get richer while consuming less resources and lowering our footprint, or is green growth possible? Well, we have seen a lot of graphs like this one about decoupling. This one is about the electric sector's sector in the United States. So you see that even to the production and the GDP increase, you can have a reduction of pollution. And that graph brings sometimes a little bit misleading message. Some people take the conclusion that it's the growth that brings, that allows for lowering impact on the pollution side. Of course, it's only one sector. It doesn't take into account transfer between sectors, between countries, and you don't have to look too much about what happened in 2009, because we see that when the GDP is not growing, that's the precise time when the pollution is reduced by the most. So to be a little bit consistent when we talk about decoupling, it's easier to talk it about at the global scale to avoid to have a shift between sectors that are not taken into account between countries. And what do we have at global scale? We don't have a lot of graphs about decoupling, but there was this one, this communication from International Energy Agency in 2016 that had a lot of impact in the climate community, where the agency was saying that it was confirmed that there was a decoupling of greenhouse gas emission and economic growth. This was a little bit an artifact of the data, because the International Energy Agency was only considering CO2 for energy. And if you take, for example, the energy sectors, you replace coal by shale gas, well, it's a shift from CO2 emission to methane emissions. And if you replace coal by wood biomass, it's a shift from CO2 emissions to land use change emissions. So when you take the full data, you don't really have a confirmed decoupling during 2 years, but the communication was still very strong and had an impact on the climate community. This graph is about decoupling or the relation, I would say, between resource use and GDP. On the right side, you see that starting in 1990, GDP at the world scale has increased by 90%, and the resource use, the material use of the whole of humanity has increased by the same amount, by the same percentage of 90%. So there you don't have even a relative decoupling. It's completely it's completely evolving in the same way. So what about decoupling? We know that relative decoupling is not enough. We usually say in the NGO community we need absolute decoupling. But in fact, absolute decoupling is not enough either, from a climate perspective at least, because we need to reduce emission sufficiently fast to stay within the carbon budgets. So we can define a sufficiently fast absolute decoupling or a genuine green growth if we want. It has been done in the scientific literature. This paper is one that defined this concept. So genuine green growth is it requires a sufficient decoupling to achieve science-based targets. This paper discusses also the concept, and this one is really interesting if you have the opportunity to read it. I will not go too deep into that right now, but I will present a quantitative analysis, trying not to be too complicated, but on how things have to evolve. So this is simple form of the Kaya equation. You can have the evolution of CO2 emissions that are written as the product of evolution of the GDP times the carbon intensity of GDP, carbon intensity of the economy. And for example, if we have a GDP that is increasing by 3% every year at world scale, and at the same time we want to reduce CO2 emission by 3% every year, this is approximately what we need to remain below 2 degrees, then you can compute, it's very simple, you can compute the way the carbon intensity of the economy has to evolve is approximately a reduction of 6% every year that we have to do, just a mathematical relation between the three variables. So we can do the same calculation in the table for different carbon budgets. You see here 2 degrees, it's 3% approximately reduction in annual emissions, and so 6% improve for carbon intensity of the economy. Is this feasible? That's the question. So we have to watch at the historical data to get a first insight. And when we take the World Bank data, we see that for the last decades, the carbon intensity of the economy has been improving at approximately 1.3% every year. So it's a lot slower than what we need for 2 degrees, which was 6% every year. It's really not sufficient, and the picture can be even a little bit worse if we look at another way to calculate the GDP. There are two big ways. There are two evaluations of the carbon intensity of the economy on the World Bank data. I will not. It's a little bit technical. I will not go too much into this. I will only use the most optimistic one. So let's say that we have been achieving 1.3% improvement every year. How can we go faster? What does that represent? The change of the carbon intensity of the economy. Basically, it represents the change of the content of GDP. So you have here on the left a high carbon economy, on the right a low carbon economy, depending on how much high carbon activities or low carbon activities you have to inside those economies. And you can shift from one model to the other by changing behaviors and technology. For example, if we take less flights, if we eat less meat, we can go towards a low carbon economy. If we change technology, the infrastructure for energy production from fossil fuels to renewable energy, we also go to low carbon economy. But it's important to realize that behavior and technology, they are climate agnostics. It means that we have change happening in both ways at the same time. In these last years, we have seen that, for example, the way people take the plane has increased, so there is more flights. Technological improvement has also led to the possibility to use more unconventional fossil fuels. So we really have to direct behavior and technology in the right direction if we want to go to low carbon economy. It's not happening by itself. So to be a little bit more specific about how to shift on the right direction, this carbon intensity of the economy, there is 4 main ways that I identify here. You can have negative emission that reduce the carbon intensity of the economy. You can have efficiency with technological improvements. You can have low carbon substitutes and changes in consumption patterns. But all these levers are limited. You cannot go as fast as you want. For example, for negative emissions, if you take BECCS technology, carbon is sucked out of the atmosphere when tree grows. It's not in the power plant, it's when tree grows. If you have a surface area with so much trees growing on that surface area, that determines the speed of the carbon sequestration, and you cannot go faster than that. There are also limits to efficiency. There are emissions that are embedded in the existing infrastructure, and there are emissions that will be emitted when we build new low carbon infrastructure. Of course, we have to do it, but we have to know that that will bring also some emissions. And there is a rebound effect. When we save money, we have more consumption. So I will just, for the last two, give a little bit more details before coming back to the calculations. For the existing infrastructure, the International Energy Agency has made that calculation about committed emissions. It's the light brown area here under the curve. Emissions from the existing infrastructure and the infrastructure under construction, and these emissions already fills almost completely the emissions that are allowed in the sustainable development scenario of the International Energy Agency, which is a scenario that brings us to 1.7 to 1.8 degree of warming. So it really will be hard to decrease emission faster than that. Maybe we can decommission some part of the infrastructure, but it will really be hard to go faster. The rebound effect, we speak about that for a long time in the NGO community. I just wanted to stress that even if there is the relationship with lower price that increase consumption, there is also non-linear effects in the rebound effect. For example, we see now that new efficient airplanes that are put on the market by Airbus and by Boeing leads to the creation of new markets. So efficiency gains can lead to the creation of new markets that did not exist before, and that leads to increased consumption. So it's not always just a linear economic effect of increased demand. Sometimes it can be even more than linear. Another example that is a little bit funny, maybe, but the efficiency in the light industry with light emitting diodes has led to very numerous new markets like this one, which is a little bit funny, I think. But that increases overall consumption. So I go back to the calculation about how we can we go fast enough to reduce the carbon intensity of the economy. We see that we've had 1.3% improvement every year for the last decades. We need 6% for 2 degrees. We need more than 10% for 1.5 degrees to respect 1.5 degree carbon budget. So it seems quite unlikely that we can remain respect this carbon budget and at the same time keep growing the global economy by 3% every year. Of course, that can be discussed, but that's the opinion that I bring to you today. We can take the problem the other way around. Let's say, okay, if we keep going in the following years, the same rate of improvement that we have been since the 1990s, so 1.3% improvement. We want to respect the CO2 annual reduction rate, and then we can calculate what is allowed for GDP growth at world scale. And we see that it's really hard picture that emerges here. If we keep on the same track, we will need to reduce global GDP by 1.4 to 1.8% to remain under the 2 degree budget. It's a very strong degrowth for 1.5 carbon budget, and even for 3 degrees, you cannot have any growth of GDP at world scale if we don't go faster. So degrowth is a strong feature in this pathway if we keep the actual improvement rate. So I played a little bit more with the data, and I say, okay, let's be a little bit more optimistic. Let's say that we have some success in the NGO community. Trump is not re-elected. There is a Green Deal at EU level. China maybe go out of coal a little bit faster than expected, and we can double the improvement rate of the carbon intensity of the economy. So now we have 2.6% improvement of the carbon intensity of the economy at global scale every year. And we want to respect, again, the carbon budget. What is the outcome for allowed GDP growth? Well, we still have approximately no growth for 2 degree carbon budget. We still have a strong degrowth for 1.5 carbon budget, and the 3-degree carbon budget allows only for a very limited growth of 1.3% a year, which is slower than the political objective that is on the table now, and it is about 3%. So another way to say a little bit the same message here is to take this curve of reduction of emissions when we want to respect either the 1.5 carbon budget or the 2-degree carbon budget, depending on what year we start. We know that the curve is more progressive or gets steeper. And if we had begun very early, like in the 1980, we could have followed like the green curve that I drew here. Maybe green growth would have been possible, and at the same time reducing emission, because it's not too fast. But when we get close to the exhaustion of the carbon budget, at some point it's not possible. It's not technically possible anymore to be at the same time in a growing economy and to follow such steep pathways for reducing emission. At this time, and I think we are there now, only a voluntary stop in emitting activities can be fast enough. We need a targeted degrowth of these activities by choice. And yes, that's an important message. But what if we don't do it? If we don't do it, but at some point in the future, we might have climate impacts that become stronger, and then that would have a negative feedback on the economy, and we could maybe have some kind of externally imposed degrowth that would be untargeted. That's difficult to know precisely on what pathways it would happen, but that's just a real risk, and it's a little bit something that we are experiencing right now, I would say, with the coronavirus crisis. We have a recession that is imposed on society, that is not targeted, and that is the result of maybe some lack of anticipation and some of preparation. We could not choose really what sectors we wanted to close. We had to, in emergency, to shut down large parts of the economy. So this is a little bit schematic, maybe too schematic, but what if it is too late for green growth, what could be the real world options? Two very different worlds. The first one on the left with the high warming and an externally imposed degrowth that is untargeted with high inequality, where high carbon activities remain important. And the other world on the right, where we have more limited warming, when we have been able to implement a targeted degrowth by choice, and where even if the level of the growth of the GDP, I draw it at the same level, these two worlds are very, very different, because we have very different climate impacts and very different inequalities in society. Yes, for this second part, so I start again from the main takeaways that I put on the screen earlier, and I will talk a little bit more about the last one, wealth repartition, to become an increasingly central topic, with starting with a narrative that is also sometimes there in the climate movement. It's the narrative that we should go to a dematerialized economy, and that maybe if we go for more art, culture, science, sports, we can still have high value, even monetary value, high GDP with low impact. So it's a little bit one of an example. But if you look at the case of David Beckham, you see that it's not. Even if he earns a lot of money from a dematerialized activity, his spending, his consumption is not low impact. Many people that earn a lot of money in this dematerialized economy. They buy nice house in different nice place on earth, and they travel a lot. So it's a way to come back again to the to put this decoupling narrative on challenge. It's very an audacious assumption to suppose that people can have an ever increasing purchasing power and at the same time reduce their footprint. And actually, it's not just this case, but a series of research papers have shown that the revenue is by far the most important determinant of the environmental impact. It doesn't matter if we think we are green, if we have surplus money, we spend it. So we have been using this kind of graph from Oxfam. I think many of you know it for a long time in the NGO community. It says the same thing, basically. It's maybe problematic, it's maybe not easy, but if we have more purchasing power, it seems to correspond to more destruction power. So can we instead promote some kind of power of living, some kind of satisfaction with lower material consumption? That's a big question. And the fact that the society might need to strive with lower overall GDP, with lower wealth, brings some hard questions. The first one is, how are we going to satisfy the fundamental needs of the people? Or how are we going to improve social justice in a society that has globally lower wealth? And the second one is for the low carbon transition. How are we going to make the investment needed in the low carbon infrastructure in a society with lower wealth? It's not that so much in my presentation that we want to have degrowth of GDP as an objective, but if we accept that in reality we will have to do with lower wealth, this question arises, and it's will bring some difficult choice. In some ways, when you have a growing economy, you can have a lot of win-win situations, but maybe the era of win-win is going to an end now, and we will have to have some difficult choice about the way to have a better repartition of wealth in the future. So I've seen in the comments, I did not have the time to read it all, that the European Environmental Bureau was talking about this report, and it's good because I have it in my slides. It's a report that brings the same kind of message that was published last year, and that say very explicitly that we have to acknowledge that the direct downscaling of economic production and consumption is needed is probably needed in the wealthiest country. And so that leads also to the need for sufficiency policies, for other kind of policies. And I don't have it into my slides, but there is also another report from the same year from European Environmental Bureau with some more precise recommendation on the policy perspective. And that's interesting. That's very important. I think that the EU NGOs start to talk a little bit more explicitly about these subjects, even if they are difficult and they are a little bit out of the box of the mainstream right now. Also in the wider climate community, some academics start to a little bit evolve and ask themselves questions about these things, this certainty. This is a translation from an article in Swedish, so you will not find it like that, but there is the link on the bottom, and you can use translator if you want to have the text. There is a lot of new concepts, of new currents of thought for new narrative. I will not get in detail into this, but it's very important to be in touch with all this intellectual activity that is going on, and trying to bring in new narratives to get in a post-growth mood, I would say. And even in the Can Europe strategy in the network, we already have something. If we look at the 5-year strategy that was adopted last year or the year before, I don't remember. The strategy really says that we have to acknowledge the fact that some aspect of the dominant narrative and growing consumption, growing production can come into direct contradiction with the systemic transformations that are needed. And so we need to implement 2 complementary strategies. Of course, we can keep working inside the institutional system with the parliament, with the commissions, with our government, but also we need to enlarge the framing of the debate. We also need to challenge the dominant narrative that is that is in those political places, and growth thinking is one of the important aspects of it. So a few words about the COVID crisis to make the link with the situation that we have now. One of the lessons that is obvious, it's a reminder, but some things we maybe had a little bit forgotten, but the quickest way to reduce pollution is to reduce polluting activities. Actually, change in consumption patterns can be much quicker to reduce pollution than technological change or infrastructure change. An important thing to have in mind is that the crisis is probably only at the beginning. We might see bankruptcies, unemployment, nationalization, public debts, and even failed states in the south. If you look at countries like Algeria, like Ecuador, like Argentina, some countries are really not in a good shape, and if the state collapses to some extent in more countries, it can be more difficult to have a real climate policy that is put in place in those countries and at the world scale, and also the same for social policies, of course. So that's a difficult context that we will have. And in link with what Mera was saying, I think we have a narrative battle that has started with this crisis. There is the back to grow, back to business as usual narrative that is very strong with the airlines or automotive industry that are asking for strong financial support. And the other narrative is taking care of people, taking care of planet. People, many people, more and more people are taking this time to sit back and reflect a little bit about the direction of our society. And of course, we have a role to play as an NGO community in that debate. So the opportunity is that we can now question a little bit more the purpose, the meaning of our economy. What do they serve? What's the point of these economies? The final purpose. That's also important. Something that we have to, I think, to make a clear distinction is between the recession that we are seeing now and the post-growth world that we might be striving for. What we have now is an externally imposed economical shock. It is untargeted. It will probably bring suffering, and we want to avoid that. So even in the future, for climate change, for climate breakdown, we don't want that. It's exactly why we are fighting climate change, I would say. So in order to avoid that, we need to address the deep causes, the root causes, as Mera was saying, and we have to accept to reduce polluting activities. We have to accept to get out of the society of excess, the culture of excess. We must accept to go to a selective degrowth by choice and try to put in place a just transition plan to have a social dimension also with it. So a few questions for the debate that will follow. Maybe there will be other questions that you will want to bring. But how can we challenge growth thinking in the mainstream? How can we tell the story of less stuff, less flight, less steel, less concrete, less meat? It's sometimes difficult for NGOs to speak about less consumption in a direct way. How can we also contribute to the answers to the hard questions, social aspect and wealth repartition? How can it happen, this discussion in each of our organization? And also in 5, I think something that is important that we don't always do, because we don't want to drop the temperature objective of the Paris Agreement, and I'm not saying that we should drop them, of course, but if there is a high probability that these targets are missed and that we end up with a higher warming, how do we adapt our action? Because the world we might face might be a world with shocks, with some disruption, like we are witnessing right now, and we must get ready to be working in this kind of difficult context, I think. So this is the end of my presentation, and looking forward for the discussion now.
Great, thanks so much, Noé. That was really insightful and also challenging.